Hello, everyone. Jack Farmer from Evolution of Movies here with a quick note regarding the unfortunate passing of Ivan Reitman, who was the producer and director of this week's movie, Ghostbusters. While this episode was recorded before his passing and therefore doesn't reference it, all of us here at Evolution of Movies wanted to offer our condolences and well wishes to the family and friends of Ivan. His movies have brought together countless people and created countless memories for them to share, memories that they'll cherish forever. Thank you, Ivan, for the wonderful stories that you have told. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it is the Evolution of Movies show, and I am Jack Farmer. I'm joined as always by Andy Rossi, but this week we have a very special guest. It's Emily May. You may know her from Mission Pro Wrestling or Pro Wrestling Pets Podcast. You can see them all over the place, and Emily, I'll let you plug those there at the end of the show just a little bit more. But at first, I just want to say thank you so much for being on. How are you today?
I am great. We're going to talk about some of my favorite things, movies.
Yay.
Yes. And Andy, how are you today?
I'm doing good, Jack. How are you?
I am an 8 out of 10 so far.
Okay.
8 out of 10. You know,
Jack
You're
is
like the worst.
He's ramping up for the day. You're not quite a 10, Jack. Not quite a 10. You got to work your way up.
It can always get better. That's the thing.
Exactly.
Well,
that's the worst I've ever heard you at, by the way.
Yeah, it's a low day for me. So let me talk about the show. This is the Evolution of Movies show. We call it the Evolution of Movies because we take a movie and we talk about it book club style, but we call it Evolution of Movies because we always pick a movie that came out 1 year after the last movie we talked about. So we started in 1980, then 1981, 1982. Now we're talking about 1984. A time when we had movies like The Karate Kid, Beverly Hills Cop, and of course, Police Academy. But we aren't talking about any of those. We're talking about Ghostbusters, a movie IMDb describes as 3 parapsychologists forced out of their university funding set up shop as a unique ghost removal service in New York City, attracting frightened yet skeptical customers. Rotten Tomato has it sitting at 97%. Making it one of the highest rating movies we've done on the show. I was excited to go back and revisit this one. Obviously, it's had sequels, cartoons, spin-offs, toys. It speaks for itself. Emily, had you seen Ghostbusters before, and what were your thoughts kind of going into it this time around?
Ghostbusters! I had to do it. Oh my God, I haven't seen this movie in so long. So I made some soup. I made some soup last night. I got in a little blanket, and I was like, "We're gonna watch Ghostbusters."
Soup your go-to movie food, by the way?
No, it's just because it's cold.
Oh,
it's just because it's cold. It just happened to be soup this time. Usually, it's like Cheez-Its and Cheetos and guacamole. Yeah. Not all those combined. So it was like nostalgic for me. I was like getting into all my favorite actors who we now know are like in some of our favorite movies of all time. So I loved it. I was like, this is so cool. And it really, the majority of it holds up so well that I was like excited to re-look at it and just kind of take it all in again from a new, 2022
perspective. Yeah. And Andy, I want to ask you, 97% on Rotten Tomatoes. Now, this is a good movie, but you don't get much better than 97%. Do you think that 97% is fair for this movie?
Well, Jack, as I've said in the past episodes, I think our first movie, Flash Gordon, got like a 67. So the 80s was all relative. So I think it does deserve a 97 for 1984.
Interesting. So, yeah, this will be a fun one to go back and talk about. Before we do, as always, I like to thank everyone who's watching and listening, whether it be on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, iHeartRadio. Remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, 5-star reviews, all that good stuff. Now, let's get into this. Let's talk about this movie real quick. We start in an old library. Spooky music plays and books float from one shelf to another while a librarian goes about her work. The Dewey Decimal System is thrown into disarray as the cards fly everywhere, and the librarian faces a bright light and a loud roar. Meanwhile, Peter Venkman is doing studies in an office and not being very ethical about it. Just before he makes a move on his subject, his partner Ray bursts in and says, "Guess what? We have a ghost." Emily, this is kind of the beginning stages of the movie. Tell us kind of the world we're going to live in and the characters that inhabit it.
I mean, this is one of the best setups of a movie that I think we've seen. And you could tell that movies from here on forward, or from this point on, have learned, like, there's mystery, you have the paranormal, you have these these characters are so fully developed. So you're in this world of paranormal, but in this huge city of New York, where you have these cast of characters that are these like paranormal psychologists, and they're trying to, hunt down what they've been searching for their whole lives, right? Mm-hmm. So you have this like quest for knowledge, but as we know, they kind of get more than what they've bargained for. So it's a funny setup, it's suspenseful, and they're just like, they kind of craft this world at this beginning moment. It's perfect, really.
Yeah, and you hit on something that I think was so cool. And Andy, I want to get your take on it. Whenever you think of ghost stories or ghost movies, it's always like some haunted house in the middle of nowhere. But this takes place dead center of one of the biggest cities on planet Earth, which is really a different take on the idea of a haunted place. Even today, you don't really see a lot of haunted big city places. That really set this apart, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and I love the fact that it was, so we're evolution of movies, so the 84, and seeing the card catalog, like you said, the Dewey Decimal System. So I was kind of thinking about what that would be today, and it wouldn't be as fun. Like, this was like having all those cards fly all over the place. I was actually thinking, I'm like, who's going to put all that back together? That's going to take a long time.
My time in the library was like, it was making me anxious. I was like, oh man, that poor librarian has to put those all back.
How am I going to find the Great Gatsby now?
Yeah.
And then just the way it was kind of shot too, you kind of get that idea. It's going to be like you're going to have spooky spirits, but it's going to be more light. It's not going to be like The Exorcist or something crazy. It's going to be like a fun ghost movie, which I want to say is probably the first movie I could think of that played with that, like the comedy and ghosts. Which is cool.
And the soundtrack sets that up as well. I don't know if we're going to get into that, Jack, but I think the music,
go into it,
the music and the sound effects, and I think the kind of the practical use of effects also set it apart from a kind of your traditional horror kind of exorcist movie. That kind of makes it that we know, like, you have to set that tone right away, and so you set it with the music, the intro, the theme. So that there's that balance. Yeah, of course.
So much of the music, by the way, too, is, to your point, is we almost take it for granted that, like, this is what spooky music sounds like. But thinking back, and maybe I'm not old enough, but was this the movie that really set the stage as this is what spooky music sounds like? Were there spooky music? I guess maybe the Addams Family was doing spooky music at some point, but so many of these, like even the Ghostbusters theme, I just take for granted as, oh yeah, this is a Halloween spooky theme, but someone had to actually create it, had to earn that spot first, and it happened here.
Ray Parker Jr., isn't that his name? That sings the Ghostbusters?
Yeah, Ray Parker.
Where is he now?
Shout out Ray Parker, living in Palos Verdes with millions of dollars on
right.
Tools.
He took a deal. They're like, here's $700 for that song. Oh, cool. Wrong bet.
He's probably wrong bet. He probably was like, yeah, $700. I ripped these guys off.
Yeah, you definitely need to like put in a percentage of profits in your contracts.
Yeah. We do get a quick peek though at Peter Venkman, who's obviously the main star. Bill Murray. We talked about this being a funny movie, and you get a glimpse into the kind of characters these guys are, and how he's, and Emily, I'll let you speak to this. Like I said, he's not quite the most ethical guy. He's not necessarily just a straightforward good guy in this movie. He's kind of a, I don't want to say a jerk. I'm trying to look for the right word, but he's kind of out for himself. Misogynist for sure. Oh, we'll get into that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we'll get into that because that's blatantly clear.
Yeah.
But what's funny is, like, I'm watching it and I kind of like just Bill Murray's so charming just as an actor, and he kind of commands the screen that I don't mind that he's.
Yeah,
I don't mind that his character is just so blatantly who he is, and that's what adds to the comedy of the movie. Where like he has this job, he kind of, you're right, he doesn't really, his base and foundation of ethics is like kind of funny, where it's not going to be completely like horrible, so you kind of just let it go.
I'm trying to think of how would you describe. He's like a funny Han Solo. What kind of character? Like I'm trying to think of the word for that. Where they're not bad people, but they're definitely, there's gray areas to their character.
I think it's just one of those people where I'd rather have as my uncle than my dad. Be like, oh, there's Uncle Bill again, shocking guys and hitting on ladies.
What funny,
or maybe your brother, like have him as a cool brother or a friend. You're like, oh man, we're gonna go on this adventure again. Okay.
well, Peter, he's doubtful that there really is a ghost at the library, but Egon is confident this time. So they interview the librarian and they look around the library. There's stacked books, slime, and a full torso apparition that turns into a terrifying monster, and everyone runs away. However, just as there's proof of a ghost, the dean of the university cuts their funding, but no fear. The guys go into business for themselves and get some quote unquote new office space and the car that will become the Ecto One and Janine, the receptionist. Andy, I want to talk to you kind of about, there's a lot of character development happening here with the characters, or at least telling us who the characters are, where you have Egon, very clearly the straight brains kind of guy. Ray, sort of the nervous Nelly, but kind of curious about life. And Peter Venkman, who just seems to be leeching on to both these guys, and Janine, who's already had enough of them all.
Yeah. No, it's great because all three of them are very different personalities. So I think they do a good job of setting that up. I remember as a kid, I really liked Ray, which I was really happy about because watching it again, I'm like, yeah, Ray. Ray seems like the good guy, the guy you want to go hang out with. Bill Murray's character, you probably get in trouble with. I did like one thing to show like that Peter Venkman was kind of like, like we talked about, kind of a jerk. It's written, it says Venkman burn in hell written on his door, which I thought was a fun little way to describe him. And the way that he came after the ghost, he's so not scared. He's that guy in the movie that's like not scared of the
just fearless,
not afraid of no ghost.
Yeah, but then when she turns into that creature, that's another story. Then he goes running away. So I thought it was great, like to kind of set up the characters. You kind of get them right away. And
Ray, I remember thinking he was the main character when I went back to watch it this time, but obviously Bill Murray, for obvious reasons, is the guy. But Emily, I want to talk to you about how iconic so many things are set up here in this opening scene, whether it be the building and the car. And again, it's interesting going back, and that's one of the reasons I like looking back, is we take for granted how iconic that building is and how iconic the car is. And it's interesting because they don't really sell us that this is going to be an iconic place and car, but it absolutely, they all become iconic things in movies.
I mean, this is why we go back and watch movies over and over again, is that you have these iconic characters, you have these iconic visuals of like the apparitions, the ghosts, like the green slime, and later in the movie we have even more iconic moments. You have those when you have a good director, you have those shots, with the blasters you remember, and like you have the car, and like you those one-liners that like we remember. Like that's what makes a great movie, and so that's why it's fun going back and watching it. So I think it was fun. Like I liked going back and because I don't know, it's probably been like 10 years since I've seen this movie, honestly. Mm-hmm. So it just was really fun to everyone has the memes of those characters and like quote it, and like that's what makes it great. And you don't know it's going to be memorable until you're 30 years.
Yeah. It's funny you say those lines, even the ones I forgot, like when they say the books are like a symmetrical book stack, and he says there's no way a human could have done this.
Yeah, it's like so dramatic, but like it's a classic line, but it has like a funny undertone, and like it's a mixture of like the delivery of the line, who's saying it, and just like the setup is just so good.
What I love about this, and Andy, I know you've just finished making the movie Dead Body, so I want to get your thoughts on this, is how this movie, it's weird. It doesn't drag things out, but it does take its time and lets everything breathe as it's happening. So nothing feels rushed. It feels like it's taking its time, yet it still gets a lot of stuff in at the same time. The pacing of this movie already is incredible.
Yeah, I mean they kickstart it right away with the spirit. They need to track it down, so you really jump into the story right away. Which for this movie I think is great. I don't think you need to know the backstory. Why did Egon get into spirits? Why did Ray? How did they all meet? I don't know. I guess we're just on for the ride. So I think they do a great job. And I don't remember how long the movie is, but I never felt like I was like, all right, let's get to it.
Right.
As some of these 80s movies were, they would take 2 hours long, and you're like, they could have got rid of an hour of that movie. This one, I felt like it was nicely paced throughout the whole thing.
A lot of stuff ages well in this movie, but one thing really stood out to me. It was just a simple line Egon said. This movie, remember, came out in 1984.
I know what you're going to say.
Print is dead. And I was thinking to myself, wow, he totally nailed that. Because in 1984, I would imagine newspapers were still going. I mean, newspapers and magazines were still going around in the 90s and everything else. But the fact that he nailed that print is dead in 1984 shows just how smart he is. Because there was no internet back then, or at least I don't know my internet history, but at least not something people were using. It was I don't know where else people would be getting their news if print is dead. I thought that was just a really wow.
So 84 is the beginning of kind of the initial internet, right?
Right.
So
but not people didn't,
but not widespread. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean they still had the card catalog and Dewey Decimal System. So
exactly.
Egon was on it.
I do feel like they probably still have the Dewey Decimal System in libraries somewhere, though.
I'm sure.
I don't know if anyone uses it, but
I mean, people still study to be a librarian. They still have to study that system, but it's just digital.
Yeah.
So.
Well, as the movie carries on, Dana and Lewis are chatting at their apartment, and the chemistry between these two is just off the charts. After seeing a Ghostbusters ad, however, Dana's kitchen becomes possessed, and a devil is living in her refrigerator. She goes to the Busters business, and they start game planning how to handle the situation. Venkman uses it as an excuse to put his moves on Dana, but she just kicks him out disgusted. Just as the guys feel like they've lost all hope, however, the Cedric Hotel gives them a call, and they head over, and we get the appearance of the now legendary Slimer. And after a large destructive battle, the fellas are able to trap the ghost and save the day. Emily, I'm going to go to you with this part because this just feels like where we need to actually bring it up. Peter Venkman was kind of creepy here. This was something that didn't really age well, I thought.
Yeah, no, this definitely did not age well. I was like, oh, this is just gross.
I mean, you're right. He is charming. And
he's charming, but blatantly disrespecting space and oh, I'll come over and we'll figure this out together. It's no. Yeah. And
no acts happening in your bedroom. Oh, I was dude, be cool, man.
Yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, watching it is a little I wouldn't say it's full cringeworthy, but it just didn't quite age well.
Yeah, I don't think we need to get a cancel hashtag going over it, but it was a little bit that didn't go.
She does say you're so odd, which I thought was great too.
Yeah, but it's also it's part of his in some ways, his character has that mix of charm and just off-putting, where it's oh, that's just kind of.
The fact that he is kind of a dirt bag, I think, it kind of saves it in the sense that, he's a dirt bag. So he's not supposed to be as kind of set up earlier on. He is kind of a jerk in that way. So I think that saves it a little bit as well.
And they give her the two options. Either you go with Rick Moranis or you go with Bill Murray. It's
hey, I would go with Rick Moranis any day.
There you go.
Rick Moranis was such a sweetheart in this movie, by the way, to everyone. He was super helpful the whole movie, super kind. I was like, this poor guy, he's just doing his best.
He had a lot of friends, though. That party was pretty impressive.
They weren't friends. They were clients.
Oh, that's right.
Made it clear.
Even sadder.
Made it very clear.
That's right.
So it could be a tax deduction.
Oh, no.
We gotta save that discussion later, though. Andy, I want to talk to you about the Sedgwick Hotel and Slimer. Again, Slimer's one of the most iconic characters in cinema, I think. But again, it's interesting how this is one of those things that in this scene on its own, it doesn't feel like this is the creation of an iconic character, yet here we are. Tell us a bit about Slimer.
Yeah, so Slimer is similar to State Puff and the car, like all these iconic things that we're seeing for the first time as a viewer, not realizing they're going to be these iconic things. So I thought it was cool how they brought in, like, when Bill Murray does go to her house, you see the little bag of State Puff marshmallows. You're like, that's going to be something later. As a first timer, you're like, this is marshmallows. And same with Slimer. You're kind of like, oh, this is just some random ghost thing, blob. I don't know. I read that it was based on John Belushi. I don't know how true that is. Just because he was like John Belushi in Animal House. But I would have never thought that was going to be, Slimer was going to continue on and be this big character. One thing I did want to mention about like kind of like the iconic, things, I guess, ghost, car, all that stuff. Did you think the car got made up very quickly? Like, it was like an old dumpy car, and then Ray just like magically made it this amazing car, and then all of a sudden they had all these proton packs. Like, everything looked really nice, ready to go. It just seemed like, did we miss a part where they were working on this stuff?
Even the building it looked like a bank by the time, like the next day after it was like, it looked like it was about to be torn down. And the next day, Janine's in there and it looks beautiful.
Magic. It's the magic of the world of Ghostbusters.
It's all just a facade. It's like just cardboard painted to look that way. So
it's all actually like really hollow. There's nothing inside anything.
This blows over. And Jack, did you catch what hotel that was? The Sedgwick Hotel?
Yeah. So I didn't. Was it? What was that?
It was the Biltmore.
Oh, in LA? I did not notice that.
Jack and I talk about wedding venues because we both DJ weddings, and so that's one of them.
We always get excited when we see a place we've been to before. The Millennium Biltmore, it has very nice ceilings. If you're ever in there, look up. Do yourself a favor and look up every now and again. But yeah, it's funny because all these characters like Slimer, I kept thinking he's a big part of this movie. He's not, though. He's in it for one scene of like 5 minutes, and then he doesn't come back really. So
yeah, when they trapped him, I was like, no, they don't. I thought he stays with them. I think I watched the cartoon a lot where Slimer had a really big part, and I was like, oh yeah, that's their buddy.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. I was like, I was thinking, when is he going to become their friend?
Yeah.
He doesn't become their friend.
Spoiler alert.
No friends. No friend time.
So the gang's success at the Sedgwick Hotel pays off, as now they're getting some positive press, and ghosts seem to be popping up all over New York. We get a montage of the fellas getting famous, ghosts getting frisky, and Dana seems impressed, even though I feel like she'd be shaking her head if she had that experience with the guy and then heard all this stuff on the radio. But this makes the guys so busy they have to hire more help with Winston. Venkman also decides it's a good time to catch up with Dana again, and they continue talking about the case and mention Zool. But more importantly, Venkman gets a date with Dana. While it seems like things are going well, Walter Peck of the Environmental Protection Agency is there at the worst possible time, as Egon is saying their storage is full and he thinks they're on the verge of a massive ghost outbreak. This is Emily. This is the part we see in a lot of movies where things are going well, life is great, but now you're starting to see that little bit of like things are going to go wrong. We see the pieces coming together of where things will go bad for our heroes.
Yeah, you got to have act 2, right? Like everything can't go right.
Yes. Now, something that stood out to me, and I don't know if this stood out to you, Emily, is lots of smoking indoors in this movie. Is it just me, or does it feel weird to see these old movies where you see people smoking indoors?
I mean, I mean, they smoked in movies for so long, so it doesn't really bother me too much. I'm just like, oh, that's back in the day, right? Just like now, I watch like TV shows and movies, and I'm like, oh, that's a big crowd. Oh,
yes,
they're not wearing a mask.
Yes.
Can they be 6 feet apart? Like we all go through phases where we're like, oh, that happened in movies for 30, 50, 60 years.
Right. So Andy, I want to ask you something is if this happened, if you heard about these guys that suddenly came around and were like, hey, we get rid of ghosts for a large fee, and suddenly ghosts were showing up at the same time these guys showed up, wouldn't you think this was all made up?
Scam.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, if you met Ray, you'd be like, oh, he's such a nice, lovable guy. I bet he's doing a good job. But if you met Venkman, you'd be like, oh, these guys are crooks.
Yeah, Venkman was the sales guy, though, because you could hear him. Like there was a line he had where he said, there's no problem too large, no fee too large for us, which I loved as a line from him.
I mean, they even got a shout out from Larry King and Casey Kasem.
Yeah, Casey Kasem.
Which was weird because hearing their voices, I thought was like, oh, that's funny, throwbacks to those guys. And then I realized, oh, no, they were still just in their heyday. That was just, that'd be like Ryan Seacrest in a movie today.
Larry King was 95 in 1984.
What I liked about this is like they're trying to figure out who their like main spokesperson is. It's like, okay, they're building their business, right? And like who's that salesman who's going to convince people that they need this service, but I totally, like, you're right. Like you would think that it's a scam when you're like, oh, all the like hundreds of ghosts are roaming around the city all of a sudden after we have this Ghostbuster team.
Right after this team becomes famous, now they're everywhere. They weren't around before, but now suddenly they are.
And can we talk about the ghost with Ray, with Dan Aykroyd?
What? Yes. Oh, what? Yeah. Dive in.
I just don't. Was that like a deleted? Was there more to that scene? Because it just seemed very out of nowhere. All of a sudden, a ghost starts taking off his pants.
Did you want to see more of that scene?
No, but I was confused on why it's in there. I don't know.
You make a good point because these guys are capturing and locking up the ghost. Why would a ghost be like, hey fella, how are you today? So that was a very weird placement of the ghost. But things that also didn't kind of make sense. And Andy, I hate this when movies have things that don't matter. And this is where we have Susan Sarandon, Dana's character. They talk about how she's plays an instrument.
Sigourney Weaver.
Sigourney Weaver. I was like,
what did I say?
Susan Sarandon.
Oh my gosh. Wow, I got that way off.
I was like, I don't remember her in the movie.
Sigourney Weaver. Oh my gosh, I lose all movie credibility. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so your show's over.
So
we'll start with an S. You are okay.
In any case, Dana, they're telling us about how she plays an instrument and she's got this dude hanging out with her and he's wondering who Bill Murray is. None of that ever comes back, Andy. What's up with this?
That is true. Yeah. I think that was just to show that Bill Murray doesn't care. He's not scared of other significant others. I think that was all that was. But I was kind of interested in that guy. He seemed kind of interesting and he never comes back. He was kind of a good 80s character, like the guy that worked for the
EPA, Walter Peck.
What an amazing 80s character. Just he wants to shut it down. He wants to shut everything down. I just thought that was a great character. And he stayed in it, but the other guy, I don't know.
You need like multiple characters that are opposition to the main characters, to
sort of flesh out the world. But Walter Peck, he's kind of one of those guys in 80s movies who are the jerks. Like, because I believe he is the reporter in Die Hard.
Yeah.
And he's so good at being that guy that's like, I'm doing my job. And then he looks like an idiot at the end and has that like look on his face, like, what? he's very underrated for that kind of role, but he always knocks it out of the park whenever he does these things. So
I was so confused what he had so against the Ghostbusters. Just because Venkman wouldn't let him see the vault or whatever that was.
You know what? I'm on his side with this whole thing. I agree with him. And you know, let's talk about this next part of the movie before we dive into that, because I'm kind of with him. So before her date, the ghost in Dana's apartment gets a little handsy, and at Lewis's party, just when he's really starting to kill it, the ghost dog starts chasing him. He runs through New York before getting caught and becoming the key master. Police eventually catch up to him, though, and drop him off at Ghostbusters Central. But Venkman is meeting up with Dana, and she's talking about being Zool the gatekeeper. While all this is going on, Ray and Winston are talking about how this may be Judgment Day that's coming, which is the worst possible time because the EPA is back and they shut down the whole thing, blowing the power and letting the ghosts free. So, Andy, this is where I question you, because the EPA is right. They've got this thing that they say, like, look, if the power goes out, it could blow up the entire city. You've got all these ghosts in it. It's actually incredibly dangerous what they're doing. And what about the rights of the ghosts? I mean, if they're dead people, I mean, they're conscious of some kind. I mean, shouldn't someone go in there and make sure what they're doing is ethical?
Yeah, but if they're telling you when you shut it down, the whole place is going to explode and ghosts are going to wreak havoc, then maybe go, okay, maybe let's think of a different situation. He just wants to shut it down. There's no like talk.
Yeah, there has to be like a strategy behind it. You have to think of like the repercussions of doing one thing versus another. And obviously we saw, you know, what happens.
Well, what if here I am, if my neighbor said they started using this stuff, what if I'm thinking, what if there's nuclear radiation? You don't know what's going on with this thing. No one's tested it to make sure it's safe. And if I knew something could blow up an entire city was right down the street from me, I'd want someone to go in there. And he tried to do it the nice way. He walks in. He even said, please, after he found out that was the magic word. I'm just asking the questions people need answered here.
Well, if George Clooney was the role of this guy, I think he'd be fine. He'd come in, he'd charm you, and you'd be like, oh yeah, go ahead, shut it down. But his approach. He just came in real hot and just real 80s arrogant, and that was the problem. His approach.
Yeah, 80s arrogant. You can't do it.
There is something special about 80s arrogant. But Emily, I want to talk about this part of the movie. We talked about getting to Act 2 before. This is the all hope is lost kind of part in the movie where everything's get shut down, the ghosts get free, everything looks like it's going bad. We also are now thinking that, hey, maybe this is where the end is. This is like where we're like, what are we gonna do? Things can't get any worse.
I mean, this is the best part of the movie. I mean, this is where the stakes are really, really high. And I like this part because it's just, you wreak havoc on everything. Ghosts are everywhere. Like, and just like from a production standpoint, like the visuals and the practical effects, and like, this just, again, when we talked about those iconic moments of things that we remember, like I remember seeing this, and you just remember this and you try to like, it's hard. Like, I feel like, I don't know if we're going to talk about the other movies and like the cartoons, but I feel like sometimes the original, this is why the original is so good, is because you can't necessarily replicate just like kind of the magic of it all, where it's just like, it totally unfolds. And like if you like break down this movie from like a script perspective and just from like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, like this is the pivotal moment that they got the timing right on.
Yeah.
And that's why the rest of the movie unfolds in such a really great way.
So this is a part, they hint at this being Judgment Day, and Winston is the one that brings it up. Andy, we talked about the characters that we felt had bigger roles in the movie before going back and watching it. Winston almost feels like his whole purpose being added was so that he could add the religious aspect, because the other characters were too science-based.
Yeah, I remembered Winston. I thought he was a Ghostbuster from the beginning. So it was interesting to be like, oh, he doesn't come in to the team until later on in the movie. And I thought Rick Moranis had actually less of a role, but he's in there pretty much the whole movie. And I got to mention those sweet dance moves he had. Because at the party, he asked the real tall girl to dance, and he does a dance for 13 seconds. I'm like, there you go. And then and I love the CGI dog thing, because The latest movie, the remake, or I guess not the remake. What do you call it? Whatever the latest Ghostbusters movie,
the
reboot. Yeah, the CGI was pretty similar, which I thought was kind of fun because 84. This is probably this was probably you probably watched it and went, wow, look at that, that's pretty cool. And now obviously it looks very dated, but they kind of kept that kind of tone in the newer movies, which I thought was a cool idea. There's one line too that Sigourney Weaver says that I remember watching this movie as a kid, and she says the line, "I want you inside me" to Venkman. And I'm glad as a kid I didn't catch that, because that's a pretty big line for a child watching this movie.
Yeah, and his response was, "I think there's too many people in there already," or something.
Yeah, I mean, and it's that line cracks me up every time because it's such a perfect response. It's like, oh no.
This is a part that like definitely teetered on could it have aged very poorly, where he's like, I have a rule against possessed people, and then he goes, well, it's a guideline more than a rule. Unfortunately, he doesn't do anything that aged inappropriately at this point.
His lines are great, Bill Murray. He had to do a lot of improv with that because it's very, very him. It was great.
There's so many lines, but I want to go back to this party, Emily, and just talk about how Rick Moranis just crushes this scene. Every line is so nerdy and so positive.
I love him.
So good, yeah.
Confident in how he's like, I could get 12 bottles of Tylenol for this for the generic stuff. This is good financial advice. Get this fish. I got it for $13. I didn't invite any friends. I invited clients.
So sad.
He says to the guy who's at his party.
Mm-hmm.
Rick Moranis, just a treasure.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, such a comedy treasure, and like I feel like I know Jack, I knew you and I, we kind of grew up in the same era, and so like he's such a pivotal person in my like childhood, where I watched him in all of my favorite movies. So I remember him so fondly. And this, like, I haven't seen in so long. So when I watched him, it just was like super nostalgic for me. And like every line he delivers perfectly. And it just like, it adds so much. Like I didn't remember him being this prominent in this movie.
Yeah.
But then he stole the scene. Like he stole this moment. And it just like, looking back at it, I was like, oh man, this is like comedy gold.
He does a funny thing too when he's the gatekeeper, because he doesn't understand what, like, I guess pizza is, and he just takes the pizza and he starts rubbing it on his face. I'm just like, what a funny maneuver by him.
I mean, I would love to, like, I would love to know like how much was him and how much was improvised, and because I know Bill Murray improvised a lot too. So
yeah, when he says that to the horse, he's talking to the horse, and the guy's like, "Hey, he pulls, you pay me." And then Rick Moranis says something like, "You will be freed soon," and runs away. Just a bunch of fun silliness throughout this. But we get to the end of the movie, and the busters get busted, and the ghosts are running amok. They realize that the apartment Dana and Lewis lived in was actually built by cultists trying to bring about the end of the world. So a cameo from Carl Winslow gets them to City Hall
as a cop,
and the mayor approves sending them to work. The gang climbs a ton of stairs and blasts Zool, but to no luck. This leads to the Destroyer arriving in the form of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, and the monster starts wreaking havoc on New York. So the boys roast some marshmallow, and Egon says, "Let's cross streams." They do. They reverse the gate, blow up the Marshmallow Man, and the city is safe for now.
Dun dun dun.
So now, Emily, this was a big like plot piece that they sort of threw in here, where they're like, "Oh, by the way, cultists did this. Log story built up to this. This isn't just random." I love that it sort of gave depth to what they did, as far as like, this isn't just a random occurrence. There's evil to this that was planned, but also it felt like they gave us a lot of exposition really fast.
They did. I mean, but I kind of like that. I liked how there was kind of the reveal of like how this was all kind of manifested, and because we had the dichotomy of like religion and then evil and like the physical world, we kind of had that trifecta of all of those powers kind of fighting their way, right? And like who would come up on top. And I don't know. I liked how all those things were revealed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe they could have done it a little bit less exposition, style, but I think, and who doesn't like the giant marshmallow man?
Such
I mean, and they toasted so much marshmallow, it turned into like a marshmallow napalm explosion, which is terrifying, but I'm hoping it smelled good at least.
Oh yeah.
They so many lines here with the mayor, Andy. The classic, I think one of the most famous lines in the movie, cats and dogs living together. That whole bit was funny. Tell us about, talk me through that the lines that Bill Murray was using during this scene.
So great. Is that where keeps calling the guy dickless or something?
Yes. He says, is this true? And he goes, yes, he has no dick.
Again, I'm like, man, I was watching this movie as a youngster, and yeah, I guess I was okay with those lines.
I mean, isn't it crazy how many lines just go over your head when you watch it as a young kid? You're like, why? My parents let me watch this?
Yeah.
Well, they happen so quick and so naturally too. Like, because what's great about Bill Murray is it doesn't sound like he's delivering a line. He's saying it like he's just saying it.
Yeah, very matter of factly. Yeah,
and it's great. But Carl Winslow, is that guy? I can't remember.
He had to have been a cop in real life or something, because he's typecast, but he's great.
Yeah. I mean, he played a cop in pretty much everything he did.
Yeah, Die Hard, Family Matters. I don't know if there's others, but I just can't
the
imagine.
The list goes on.
I can't imagine him as not a cop. Like if he was like any other job, I'd be like, that's not. What's he doing? Why is he doing that? It'd be like when Homer Simpson works somewhere other than the power plant. You'd be like, oh, this is just a silly thing he's doing on the side.
Yeah. I did like how they showed Slimer too, because I was like, come on, where's Slimer at? And then of course he comes back. I think he's just got like a ton of hot dogs, right? He's eating a bunch of hot dogs at this point, which I thought was funny. And I got to mention the song that's playing. I'm an old man, and I have closed captions on what I watch, and the lyrics for the song was saying "saving the day," and I just thought that was funny. Like while they're like trying to save the day, the song was literally called "Saving the Day." I just thought that just made me laugh. It was very 80s.
I thought line of the movie came right at the end here after Egon got covered in marshmallow, and he says, "I feel like the bottom of a taxi cab." So that kind of wraps up the movie. Again, one of the more iconic movies of all time. Emily, I want to get your thoughts, kind of, I guess, final thoughts, overviews of this movie, and I guess the impact it had and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really fun movie. It was fun kind of going back and watching it again. I think it's one of those that like it's like a time capsule to like a moment. Yeah, I mean, it's an icon. Like we have toys like in pajamas, and we had remakes and cartoons, and it just shows that like it's multi-generational. It's touched one generation and continues to do so. So I think it's really cool. I mean, I don't know if y'all liked the remake of the movie. I like the new version, but I think that's
two recent remakes, whether it be the Afterlife or the female cast version.
Yeah.
I haven't seen Afterlife, but the female cast version was fun. I like it.
Yeah, it was fun. And it kind of references the original and kind of has that connection. Yeah. I mean, I think it's fun. I think it's going to be one of those movies if we all have kids, we're going to show it to our kids.
Yeah. And Andy, your final thoughts about a movie that is so timeless that, the kids are dressing up like it in Stranger Things, and kids watching that movie totally get the reference.
Yeah, I mean, it was really cool to watch the original, because I know for me, I watched the cartoon a lot when I was a kid, and even had a Stay Puft and Slimer toy. So it was cool to see like the beginning of it and kind of be like, oh, wow, from this came all these other things. So it was really cool to see. And one thing I didn't remember that I just thought was funny is Stay Puft, it becomes giant size because it's in Ray's head.
Yes.
I didn't remember that at all.
I forgot that like she like read his mind, and then like it made it happen. And of all the things he could have thought about, I loved how it was a memory from his childhood.
Yeah.
And like roasting marshmallows and stuff like that. I think it was really sweet. And then it literally was sweet. And what's nice is like, of all the ways to like end your time on Earth, like why not buy a giant fluffy marshmallow, liquid marshmallow fluff, you know?
That's Ray. That's why I like Ray so much, because that's what his brain went to, some like Pillsbury Doughboy looking marshmallow thing. And I think the whatever, not Zool, I forget all their names, but that main villain asks if he's a god, and he says no. And then I think it's Winston that's like, next time, say yes.
You're a god.
And I'm like, oh, Ray.
And that reminded me of like every alien movie or like invasion movie that you hear where they're like, are you the leader of whatever? Yeah. And they always say no, and then they like die or get attacked. I'm like, oh, it all goes back to Ghostbusters.
I was going to ask you guys, if you got asked that question, would you say yes or no? I'd say yes.
Totally.
Would say yes.
Totally.
But so that does it for us and for this movie. But before we go, a couple things. Emily, every time we do an episode, I like to test Andy Rossi and play the game of 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. So, Andy Rossi, can you take a character from this movie and connect them to Kevin Bacon in less than 6 moves?
Yeah, this one was a surprisingly easy one. So, Bill Murray was in the movie Wild Things with Kevin Bacon.
Oh, that was very easy.
Just like
that was...
I forgot that he was in Wild Things. That's a weird movie for him to be in. But that does it for us. I'm Jack Farmer. You can find me at Real Jack Farmer across all social media. Andy Rossi, where can the world find you online?
You can find me at Just Andy Rossi.
And Emily May, where can the world find you online and all the projects you're working on, like Mission Pro Wrestling and Pro Wrestling Pets?
You can find me on all social platforms at Emily May Heller. Follow Mission Pro Wrestling on all of their socials. And you can watch Pro Wrestling Pets on Untitled Chapter.
Perfect. And that means that brings us to a close to 1984. Our next episode is going to be 1985's The Goonies with Alyssa Marino. And then we go to 1986 for Aliens with Emerald Monzon. And 1987 for Can't Buy Me Love with Aaron Ross. Those are going to be some fun ones. Emily,
so lucky.
Thank you
I love all those movies.
Thank you so much for being on the show with us. That does it for us, you guys, and we will see you next year.